We're very excited to do this presentation today, Books About Books. I was just saying to Nancy before we started, I said, oh, this might be one of our best presentations ever, at least in terms of the stylistic portion, which we used a program called Canva to do that. So first we'll start with
Fiction.
fiction. Nancy,
Okay.
take it away.
Okay. There are a lot of books about books, and I wanted to put them in categories because I thought it might be easier to make thematic sense here. I just picked a sampling of books about libraries, and I just want to briefly talk about each one. The first one you see on the list is Personal Librarian, which was a very big hit. Marie Benedict was the author. This is about Bella Green, who was hiding the secret that she is actually a Black woman. She's passing as white. She's hired by J.P. Morgan to curate his newly built library, and she was a very influential person in the library field. At the same time, she's hiding this secret because she knows she would lose her job immediately. So I found this a very interesting and compelling book, one of the favorites of the librarians at New City last year. The next book is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson, a very different library from the Morgan. In the rural community in Kentucky, Cussie Mary is a pack horse librarian. She is delivering books to the people in her community. And the interesting thing about Cussie is that she's one of the blue-skinned people, which is a real thing in parts of Kentucky. It was a mutated gene that caused people to have blue skin. So that's another little added feature of the book. Next, we have a very popular book. It was on the New York Times bestseller list forever, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And it's kind of a science fiction fantasy book about somebody trying to find out what their most fulfilling life is. And she does this through the confines of the Midnight Library. Next, we have, and this we'll see is a theme, the Paris Library. This was a bestseller last year, too. The Paris Library, of course, takes place in Paris. And it takes place during World War II. And it makes it seem as if people who are librarians have very exciting lives. In fact, it's the story of the heroic librarians of the American Library in Paris, who some of them joined the French Resistance. And then the book goes into 1983, where a lonely teenager befriends this elderly woman who was one of those heroic librarians. And that's the story of this book. What's the next one? I can't see. The next one is, The Librarian Spy by Madeline Martin. That's another World War II library themed book. It's two women. One is a librarian, one is a printing apprentice. And they are really spies. So during World War II, they send coded messages to each other, and they're trying to obviously win the war. This is based on a true story. There really were librarian spies in World War II. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a career opportunity for us today. Maybe there is, I don't know. But it makes librarianship seem very exciting.
Nancy, I just have a question about the Midnight Library.
Yeah.
Because I tried to read that, and I couldn't get into it, but I know a lot of people really like it. It's perpetually popular,
yes.
Always one of the most popular books. Does it have something to do with, like, when you said science fiction fantasy, kind of like the metaverse idea that you could live different lives?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. There's different ways your life can go.
Depending on
your choices that you make. And so it's got that kind of existential, kind of unearthly feel, like you could make a decision, go this way, make a decision, go that way. And people are able to look at the different choices that are ahead of them.
Did you see the movie that won the Best Picture for the Oscar? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once?
No.
That was that kind of a theme.
Yeah, I think that people are really trying to find some meaning in life or trying to like think of different ways that you could live. And that's very appealing to think that you could change things. All right, so let's go on to the next one, which is book clubs. And who doesn't love a book club? Having your wine and your snacks. The first book on the slide is the Radcliffe Ladies Reading Club. That happens not to be out yet. It's coming out June 6th. But what the book is about is four young ladies. They're going to Radcliffe, and one of them finds kind of a second home away from home at the Cambridge bookstore. She encourages her friends to come with her, and they start a little reading club. So I don't know that much about the book, but I think it also talks about the choices that women had when they went to Radcliffe. They couldn't go to Harvard, and their lives were more or less prescribed for them. So the reading club, I think, is a way for them to explore their possibilities in life. Okay, the next book, the Jane Austen book club, that's kind of a light fodder for a book club. It's five people. It's actually five women and one man form a book club to read Jane Austen books. But while they do that, it's almost like an excuse for all the tumult in their lives and all their marriages and all their little doings. And I think anyone who's been in a private book club will know that sometimes talking about your life competes with talking about the book, and sometimes talking about your life wins. That's why I like library book clubs, because we tend not to do that. We're talking about the book. All right. The next book, some people might remember, it was a big seller about 20 years ago, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society. This book was also a great seller. It talks about during World War II, the Isle of Guernsey, which is in the it's part of England, but it's a little there's a couple of little islands there. But Guernsey during World War II was occupied by the Nazis, and they were very strict with the inhabitants. There were curfews, so the people there fought back in their own way by starting a book club. It was almost like an excuse for a book club so they could exchange information, but they also did read, and it was a very important way for them to bond. And it's a lovely book. Okay, the next book is The Reading List, which is a fairly new book. Also, it's very poignant. It's about this man who's takes place in London. He's an elderly man. He's very lonely. He goes to the library, and while he's there, he meets this young girl who works at the library at the checkout desk, and she's very bored. So one day she finds a crumpled up reading list. So she decides, what for the hell of it, she'll just read the books on the list. And she really likes them. So she shares this list with this elderly man who she sees every day. And they end up having a little book club of two people where they talk about the books, they read the books, and it's a very enriching experience for them. So it's just a lovely story of people finding each other through books. What's the last one there? I can't.
The Blackout Book Club.
Oh, okay. Guess when this takes place? 1942. The women in a small Maine community decide to form a book club while they're on the home front. They don't know each other that well, but being in this book club brings them some sort of unity and maybe strength to get through the dark days of World War II. It's funny how these book club books, a lot of them libraries hark back to maybe in a simpler time, but an earlier time, like in the 40s. If you put together the word Paris and library, or book, you'd probably find a whole spate of books that cover libraries. And I hate to say it, it sounds like they're having a much more exciting career than we do today in a suburban library. The first one, The Story Life of A.J. Thickery. Brian, you're reading that for chapters, so I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yes, I'm currently reading this book right now. It's about a curmudgeonly, widowed bookstore owner on an island. And, whenever you have a curmudgeon right at the beginning, usually I'm sensing that something. There's changes beginning to happen in him. So I think it's going to be a feel good story, but I'm not sure. But if you're interested, it's May 9th at 7 o'clock on Zoom. And Gabrielle Zevin has a newer book out called Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, which I haven't read. Nancy, have you?
No, I haven't. It's
But
supposed to be good.
it's probably one of the more popular books, I'd say, of the last 6 to 8 months, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
So and then while I'm on, I'll let Nancy. I'm going to talk about Louise Erdrich's The Sentence, which is another book that we read in the Chapters book group, and I thought that was a really good book. Solid 8 out of 10, I'd give it. And it's a pandemic novel, and it takes place in a bookshop in Minneapolis, and the bookshop is haunted, and all kinds of things are happening in it. It's got a Native American theme. Well, Louise Erdrich owns a bookshop in Minneapolis, and so she's kind of like that character in the background who, only has a small part, but she's there. So it's really kind of an interesting book. I highly recommend that. One of the better books I've read. Chat. Heads up, library's closing at 4:30 because the AC is broken. Ooh.
I thought it was kind of hot there. Okay.
Okay. I'll let you talk about the other.
Okay, Bookish People. I just gave this book to someone the other day. She was looking for something light. This is a wacky week in the life of an eccentric Washington, D.C. bookshop. There's a lot of humor in this book. It's a middle-aged bookshop owner everyone who works in the bookshop is a lot younger than she is. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and generational humor. But it also deals with serious subjects. This book takes place just after Charlottesville in 2017. So it also discusses some very serious issues, but there's also a lot of humor. The next book is by Penelope Fitzgerald, who's one of my favorite authors. This one is The Bookshop. This was also a movie. I don't know if anyone saw it, but it's a very poignant book also. It starts off, this woman who's recently widowed. It's 1959. She decides in her little town she loves to read. She's going to open up a little bookshop. And she lovingly gets her bookshop up and running. And it turns out she runs into some people in the town who don't really like her, some merchants who don't like what she's doing. The people who are like the cultured, artistic people don't like the books she's selling in her bookshop. And it has a kind of a disappointing end. But the book itself is beautiful, and it talks a lot about ideas and books and people's idea of not allowing things to be sold because they might be offensive. I really enjoyed this book. The next one is a real old book. It was published in
Nancy, wait a second. So in Penelope Fitzgerald's The Bookshop, she's a widow who owns a bookshop. So in Gabrielle Zevin's, A.J. Fikry is a widower.
Oh,
I think someone is killing people's
spouses because Bookish People. She's also a widow.
And that was also made into a movie. Then they're making movies of it.
We have three bereaved spouses starting bookshops. Could that be a coincidence? Okay, but we'll go to 84 Charing Cross Road, also a movie. But I love this book. It's a very short book. It's kind of what they used to call an epistolary novel. It's made up of letters written between Helene Hanff, who is a sarcastic, sassy New York woman. This is after the war. And she writes these letters to this very proper bookseller in London. She's looking for certain editions of books, and they start up a friendship. And they become very close. She sends him packages. She gets to know his family, but it's all done through the mail. And it's just a lovely story of a friendship. If you can get it, it's probably I don't know if it's out of print, but it's we could get it for you if anyone's interested. It's a lovely book. It's certainly worth reading. Okay, next we have publishing, that cutthroat profession. Um, the first book on this list is The Vixen by Francine Prose. I read this book last year, and it was really, I really liked it. It's about a young man who's a Harvard graduate. He gets a job in this publishing company, and his first job, he's going to edit this book called it starts with The Vixen, and it's really a fictionalized telling of the Rosenbergs, Ethel and what's his name? Julius, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. But what the author has done is she's really made this into a bodice ripper, a steamy sex pot, which wasn't like the real Ethel at all. Ethel was a devoted mother. She was certainly not, enticing spies into her boudoir. And so the main character, I think his name, he's really not comfortable with this. It turns out he's really a Jewish kid, and his mother knew Ethel, and she said Ethel was the best mother. She was wonderful. She was nothing like this depiction of this book. So he has this moral dilemma of what should he do? Should he intercede and or should he just go along and do his job? So it's a very thought-provoking book. The next book, I have to say I didn't read it, but it's about publishing. It's called New York, My Village by U.M. Akpan. He is a Nigerian author, and the person in the book is a Nigerian guy in publishing in Nigeria. He wins this very prestigious fellowship to come to New York and to work in a publishing company so that he can learn and take his knowledge back to Nigeria. But what he doesn't know is he's lived in Africa, and he comes into this bastion of whiteness and cultural superiority and people making false assumptions about Africa. And he's very disturbed by this. And he really wants to tell the stories of African people. So there's a conflict there. And I think that it's probably a book that would make you uncomfortable to read because there's some truth in there that might be hard. The next one is by Stephen Rowley, who's written a few other books. The Guncle, Lily and the Octopus, The Celebrants is coming out. But he's a very good writer. He's a young guy. This book, The Editor, is about a young man who finally has his book published it's bought by a major publishing company. And who is his editor? Jackie Kennedy Onassis, which he's just dumbfounded to be working with her. He's so intimidated by her. But they form a friendship of sorts, and she invites him out to her house in Martha's Vineyard, and he gets to know her, and it's just an amazing look at the working life of Jackie Kennedy Onassis told in this fictional setting, but very good book. And she helps him discover the truth of his life and whether he can actually have the courage to write about it. So there's that whole undertone of the book. The next one, The Other Black Girl, I believe that came out last year as well. Takia Delilah Harris. This is an interesting book because in my investigating mysteries, we read a book about a woman who's the only Black executive in her law firm or in her company. In this, I guess typically publishing has been very white. But there's one woman who, Nella, her name is, and she's working at this publishing company as an editorial assistant. She's the only Black girl there. So when they hire another Black girl, Hazel, to sit next to her in the cubicle and do the same sort of work, she's delighted because now she's not the only one. But Hazel is not who Nella thinks she is, and it causes, some repercussions. It's a very good book. You don't have to accept the political viewpoint. You could just read it for a good story. But I really like this book. The next one is could have gone in mysteries. It's The Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This book was also, I think in the fall, it was on Masterpiece Mysteries, if anyone saw that. I just love this book. It was so clever. It's about a woman who's an editor, and she gets the last manuscript from her author, who she's always edited. He writes mysteries, and the last chapter is missing. So she's trying to track it down. Nobody knows where it is. And in the meantime, you're reading chapters of his book that she's going to edit, and then you find out her search for this last chapter. And it's just such a clever conceit to have these two storylines going on at the same time. And I think he writes the greatest mysteries. He does everything. He's just an amazing guy. So that's Magpie Murders. I definitely recommend that one very highly. All right, what do we have next? Book banning. Book banning has actually come into the forefront of the news lately. In 2022, there were 1,269 book challenges, which is almost double of the year before. So this is something that could happen anywhere, and it's happening. Let's look at Fahrenheit 451, which is the classic about book burning. It takes place in the dystopian future where this particular character is a fireman. His job is to burn books, and he's fine with it until he meets someone who opens his eyes to the power of books and the ideas in books, and goes on from there. But this is probably the daddy of all the book burning books. The next book, which was The Librarian of Burned Books. And this is about a young woman from the Midwest. This is in the 30s, and she's summoned to Germany to organize a library. And while she's there, she sees what's going on with the book banning, books that are burned because they're written by the wrong people or have the wrong ideas. And Nazi Germany, of course, is not known for encouraging free thought. So it talks about her life, and it's based on a true story too. So again, another World War II book burning library. The Day They Came to Arrest the Book is actually by Nat Hentoff, who I'm sure most of you have heard of. This is actually a young adult book, and this is about a school where the parents in the school want to ban or get rid of a book called The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn on the basis that it's racist. So this is a ban coming from the left. And the school newspaper editor, a young boy, decides he's going to fight book banning. So this is a way to look at book banning from every side. And it's an older book, but it's certainly worth reading. The next one, Ban This Book by Alan Gratz, is a children's book, actually. It's about a fourth grader who is upset when a well-meaning parent wants to remove the book, The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankenweiler, which is a very well-known book, and he's upset about banning books. So I think even though these are children's books, sometimes you can get to the real nub of an article, of an argument. You can really get to what it means. So even though they are children's or YA books, I think it's still worth it. I can't see this other one. Oh, The Book Thief. The Book Thief is probably the most widely read young adult book by adults. People just love this book. And sometimes you slap a YA label on a book, people will not read it. They think it's a kid's book. This isn't. It takes place in 1939 in Germany. A young girl, she steals things, and she starts stealing books, and she shares them with her neighbors and with the Jewish man who's hiding in the cellar. So this is a very powerful look at book banning and censorship and cruelty. And also it's a very wide-ranging book. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend this one as well. Writers. That was my favorite little thing, the typing hands. Writers, people who write about people who write. The first one here is The Writing Retreat, which is a debut novel, came out a few months ago, and it's got an eerie kind of supernatural feel to it. These four women are chosen to, they had to submit a writing sample, and then they were chosen to attend this writing retreat given by this writer who's a famous woman, a horror writer, and they just idolize her. So they come to this mansion. It's very isolated. There's no neighbors. And they find out that they are responsible for writing from scratch a new novel. They each have to have a novel written in the end of their 4 weeks there, which is a pretty impossible task. And they're given a quota of how many words they have to write every day. And that's the premise of the book, but it gets very creepy and supernatural, and I really loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Okay, The Plot by Jean Ham Corlitz. You probably have heard of her. She's written some really interesting books. The Latecomer was, I think, her latest one. This plot takes place in the world of writers. The young man at the center of the book, he published one novel that did fairly well, but nothing since. He's reduced to teaching writing at this kind of third-rate community college, and he's got writer's block. Well, one of his students is this annoying, obnoxious, conceited guy who says, "I have a plot for the greatest novel of all," and he tells him what it's about, and then he disappears and he's presumed dead. So the teacher says, "Well, this plot's available. I might as well just use it. The guy's dead. It's not going to do him any good." So he does use that plot to write his bestseller smash hit novel. And he thinks he's okay. He's got money. He's got fame. He's got a book contract. But then he gets an email that says, "You are a thief." So he knows somebody knows about this. So it's a literary suspense thriller. It's a very fun read. Okay, The Lunar Housewife. I think this is also from last year by Caroline Woods. It takes place in the 50s when the United States government, unbeknownst to most people, is very involved in what people are writing and reading. So they really don't want people to write books that portray the United States in a bad light or do anything that seems unpatriotic. So this young woman writer overhears some conversations, and she becomes suspicious that people are being in the pay of the government, people who she trusts, who are writers, and they're paid to write certain things. Ernest Hemingway makes an appearance in this book too. But the fun thing about this book is she's writing a fictional, she's writing a romance sci-fi novel called The Lunar Housewife, and those chapters are included in the book, and those are fun to read. Allotted to the Sky by one of my favorite authors, John Boyne. This is about this man named Maurice. He's young and handsome, charming. He wants to be famous, and he decides he's going to be a famous writer, only he doesn't have any talent. So what he does, and this story is told from the viewpoints of people that he comes in contact. We don't hear from Maurice himself until the end of the book, where he kind of ingratiates himself and he steals their stories, their lives, and writes them, and then they become bestsellers. Gore Vidal is a character in the book, and I just thought that Maurice was just an unforgettable character. He's such a creep, but there's two things. He wants to be a father, and he wants to be a famous writer, so he wants to accomplish both of those things. Doesn't matter what happens to the people around him.
Writers and Lovers.
Lovers by Lily King. This was a look at a young woman who's an unsuccessful writer. She's 31 years old. She's been writing. Nothing's happening for her. She supports herself by waitressing and dog walking, but she feels like her life isn't going anywhere, and she's just suffering for her art, but she's not doing anything, and her friends have gone on to make real lives for themselves. So really that tug on a writer, who's not successful. How much should she give up? When should she stop? I just thought this was very well written, and you really get to understand the character. If you like character-driven novels, this is a good one. All right. What do we have? Oh, bibliomysteries. This is really a big thing in library, in mysteries. They're mysteries that involve the world of books. And in fact, there's a picture here of a book called Bibliomysteries, and these are stories edited by Otto Penzler. So there's a rich cache of bibliomysteries if you like them. So let's take a look at just a few of them. Okay, library mysteries. Apparently, people who write these think that librarians have nothing better to do than solve crimes in their libraries. If you look at Murder at the Lakeside Library and A Murder for the Books, you could see that the covers are very appealing. They're attractive. They're pretty colors. Sometimes they have puns in them. Sometimes they're soft cover, sometimes hardcover. They tend to be in series. And it basically, a woman comes to be the director of a small town, bucolic, pretty little library, and she finds a dead body in the library. If they're cozies, there's usually no blood or guts or gore. And then she decides she's going to solve this case along with her other duties. Usually the person who's killed is either like a mean trustee or a library enemy or something, somebody who deserves it. So both of these books, Victoria Gilbert and Holly Danver, they're the first book of a series. So if you do like them, you like a cozy mystery, takes place in a library with a very sharp and savvy librarian sleuth, there you go. Okay, the one in the middle, Miss Zukas and the Library Murders, that's one of the first of this genre. These came out a while ago. And Miss Zukas is unfortunately a real library cliche. She's very prim. She's very, she's just like she's just everything you think of a librarian, or people used to think of a librarian. She's very conscientious. She's very precise. She's very neat. And she finds a dead body. She teams up with a friend, and they decide to solve these murders. And there's a series of them. I think the books might be out of print now, but it's the first. I think she was the prototype of the librarian sleuth. Okay, the last one on this is Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. This is a book that does not have a librarian in it. It's 4 people are sitting in the reading room of the Boston Public Library. It's 4 strangers. They don't know each other. They hear a scream. There's a murder. And they look around and they said, well, none of us at this table could have done it because we're all here. And they decide, even though they're strangers to each other, they decide to team up and solve the crime. So it was kind of a fun book. There were no librarians in it that I remember. Okay.
Nancy, how about A Murder for the Books?
Oh, yeah, that's just like Murder for the Books. She's an academic librarian who moves in with her aunt, and she's at this race because all these murder librarians, they're always little libraries. They're not in like New York Public, except for Murder at the 42nd Street Library. Oh, did I talk about that one yet? Murder at the 42nd Street Library is a man librarian who finds a dead body in the library. He becomes a reluctant sleuth, but because sometimes they want to be the sleuth, sometimes they don't. This was the start of a series. I think there were 3 books by the Con Lahane. So that's not a cozy, but it's at that library, a librarian hero. And Murder for the Books, again, it's a cozy. Now here's the rare book trade, which in real life, these are all fictional accounts, but in real life, there have been a lot of thefts, or I don't know how many murders, but people have, there's a big market in stolen rare books. People take out maps, they sell them. Sometimes people discover in a college library, no one's looked at the book in years, and now they find out it's missing most of its pages. Bradford Morrow wrote the 2 books on the left, The Forgers and The Forger's Daughter. We did The Forgers for Investigating Mystery. It's about a reformed literary forger who hears about someone who's been murdered, book dealer, and he decides to investigate. What I liked about these books is you learn a lot about forgery and how painstaking it is, and how people are trained to say, no, that's not the way he got it, and this is a forgery. And so you learn a lot about forgery and what a big business it is. The Department of Rare Books and Special Collections takes place in a university. This woman becomes temporary head of the department when her boss has a stroke. While she's doing an inventory, she discovers that their most famous and most treasured manuscript is missing. So she decides she's going to go look for it. Book to Die by John Dunning. There were 8 books in this series. Cliff Janeway is when the book starts, he's a Denver homicide detective. Well, he leaves the force, and his other passion was rare at first edition. So he decides he's going to open up a little bookshop, and then he solves crimes on the side. Um, but those were very popular. If you like rare books, or he did a good series. There are no more coming out though. And then finally, we have Bookman's Tale by Charles Lovett. Um, this is it's a novel of obsession, and it's about a man whose wife dies. A young man. He leaves North Carolina, goes to England, opens up a little bookshop. I guess that's what widowers and widows do. They open up bookshops. It just seems to be a trend. And he finds a picture of a woman who looks just like his late wife. And he decided he's going to investigate where this picture came from, what happened. It has something to do with Shakespeare, but it's all wrapped up with this rare books and things like that. And it is a fascinating world, the rare book trade. I don't know if it's as deadly as these books make it out to be, but certainly these books were a lot of fun, and it takes you into a world you may not know that much about. All right. I don't know if we have anything left here. Okay, now it's Brian.
Nancy, do you want to talk about Overdue, Reckoning with the Public Library?
Okay. Yeah, I kind of wanted this book in here. I read this book last year, and what it is Amanda Oliver was a librarian at the DC Public Library for 9 months in this inner city library, and it was sounded like a nightmare. There were the library's an open space, and anyone could come in, and so they were had a lot of the homeless population there. A lot of people who were mentally ill, who were menacing her, particularly because she was a young woman. Her situation was so nightmarish, not at all what you would expect a librarian has to face every day, and certainly nothing I've had to face every day. I mean, I think we've all had like scary little incidents, but this was a constant barrage of difficulties. And the administration said, well, this library isn't the worst. We really can't give you any help. They had some security guards, but the problems at the library really forced her out of the profession. And this was a very controversial book because a lot of librarians didn't think she was giving the library a fair chance. She'd only been there 9 months. But it really makes you think about what a library is supposed to be today and what librarians are expected to do today, which is different than in the past. So I don't know that this would be of interest to many people, but as a librarian, it was very interesting to me.
If I had to pick one book off here, I probably would recommend Susan Orlean's The Library Book, because she's an excellent writer. She wrote The Orchid Thief. She wrote for The New Yorker, and it's about the Los Angeles Public Library fire, which I think was the largest fire at a library in North America. Anyway, it was a significant fire, and so she goes back, as a good writer of narrative nonfiction does, and tells a little bit about the history of Los Angeles itself, a little bit about real kind of detective work about who the possible suspects were, and then kind of bringing it up to date. What is the Los Angeles Public Library today? So a really good read, The Library Book by Susan Orlean. The next one is Double Fold, Libraries and the Assault on Paper by Nicholson Baker. And I read that book, I think when it came out, I was in library school, and it's about microfilm, libraries microfilming, throwing out the old papers and microfilming them. And it talks a lot about newspapers. I remember after I read this, I went online and bought some original newspapers from the 1790s, and they weren't very expensive, maybe like $15 or $20. These are like newspapers from during the Washington administration. So,
Mhm.
um, uh, really amazing stuff. So, I think I bought a copy of The Liberator, which was William Lloyd Garrison's
Oh, yeah.
newspaper. These things were not, they were very inexpensive because what he explained is libraries microfilm these papers and then they just dumped this stuff. And then people like went dumpster diving, found them, sliced them up, and then sold them individually, one at a time. So it's a crazy story. I don't know if I read it. It kind of got me interested in microfilm. So in my career, I've helped get us a lot of the microfilm digitized in Rockland, and so it
Mhm.
was that influential on me to read that. The World's Strongest Librarian is a memoir about a librarian with Tourette's, and he's from Utah,
Oh.
so he's Mormon, or I think maybe he left the Mormon Church. So it has that kind of aspect to it, but also the Tourette's aspect. Um, and you think about a library, you think of it as quiet. You think about someone with Tourette's, and you think about someone who's yelling things out. So it's those two kind of competing things. And somehow he found peace in the quiet of the library. A good memoir. He spoke at the Library
Yeah.
Association of
Yeah, he
Rockland
was
County a few years ago. It was interesting.
yeah.
Um, and then the last one is The Professor and the Madman, which is about a tale of murder, insanity, and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. Simon Winchester is also a very good narrative writer of narrative nonfiction. I think he has a new one coming out in May, which certainly we will pick up.
Yeah.
And I had a professor in college who talked all about the Oxford English Dictionary. She wanted us to look words up in it. And I think at the time I didn't really understand what the Oxford English Dictionary was. But later on, when this book came out, I read it, and it's kind of a wild ride. But if you're interested in history and you like narrative nonfiction, it's a good read.
Mm.
I think that's it. So I am going to